There's something in you that still hasn't figured out why life isn't moving forward. You study, you try hard, you read books, you make plans, you pray, you visualize, but for some obscure reason, it always feels like you take one step forward and two steps back. And no one sees this from the outside. You smile, share motivational quotes, post about goals and achievements, but at night, when everything goes quiet, you feel like something's wrong, something inside, something that holds you back, something that sabotages you, a part of you that hasn't yet understood that you deserve to win. The truth is, you're not afraid of failing, you're afraid of succeeding, because succeeding requires breaking old pacts, it requires defying inherited beliefs, it requires abandoning the emotional comfort of the suffering you already know. You were trained to survive, not to thrive. And every time you try to break free from this silent destiny, something inside you screams, "Go back. This isn't for you." That scream isn't yours. It's the echo of a world that taught you to limit yourself. And today, you're going to learn how to silence that voice. This video isn't motivational content. It's a mirror, and maybe it's the most necessary confrontation of your life, because you're sabotaging yourself without even realizing it. And here's the proof. If this topic has already stirred something in you, subscribe now. Here we don't deceive you with promises, we awaken you with truths. And if you have the courage to keep going, what comes next will shake everything you thought you knew about yourself. The day I almost gave up and discovered I was my own worst enemy, invisible self-sabotage and inherited subconscious programming. Sometimes what drags us down isn't the weight of the world, but the echo of our own unresolved beliefs. I remember the day I almost gave up on everything. Everything seemed to be going well on the surface, opportunities arising, doors opening, paths aligning, but inside I felt a strangely comfortable emptiness, a kind of silent sabotage that no one saw, but that I knew intimately. It was as if, right at the moment of a breakthrough, something inside me pulled the emergency brake. That inner voice didn't shout, it whispered, subtle, disguised as caution, as fear of failure, as a sense of reality. And without realizing it, I complied. I'd say, "It's not the right time yet. I need to prepare more. I'll start when things are more certain." But deep down, I was just running from myself, from a part of me that believed I wasn't worthy of what was coming my way. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That day, I understood. My fate wasn't to fail. But my mind was still trained for scarcity, for effort that never pays off, for almost. I was a master at starting and stopping, at sabotaging my own flight just before takeoff. The mind that got me this far wouldn't be the one to take me further. And that was the painful key. I wanted to evolve, but I didn't want to let go of the old me. I wanted to conquer, but without betraying the identity I was taught to protect. The sufferer, the striver, the one who fights hard and gets little, and still takes pride in it. This is where self-sabotage becomes a camouflaged art. It wears the mask of humility, of excessive planning, of outdated spirituality, and it convinces you that stopping is prudent, when it's actually fear. That giving up is wisdom, when it's trauma. That delaying is strategy, when it's cowardice disguised as logic. Napoleon Hill called this the invisible enemy of progress, and he said, "The greatest mistake you can make is to be afraid of making mistakes. But the real fear is of getting it right, because getting it right demands responsibility, visibility, exposure, and many prefer the familiar failure to the unknown victory." That day, sitting with myself, I looked into the mirror of my soul. And I realized it wasn't the market, it wasn't the competition, it wasn't bad luck. It was me. It was my mind saying don't go when everything screamed move forward. It was the wounded child inside me sabotaging the adult trying to bloom. And that doesn't make you weak. It makes you unconscious. The good news is that awareness transforms. The bad news is that it requires pain, because waking up is seeing what was always there, but that you chose to ignore. From that moment on, I decided to stop negotiating with my small mind. I started training my brain like it was a muscle, reprogramming thoughts, interrupting patterns, monitoring every belief. It wasn't quick, it wasn't pretty, but it was real. Do you want to win? Then accept this brutal fact. You're sabotaging yourself. And what's sinking you isn't life, it's the story you keep telling yourself. The lie I was told about humility, that kept me broke. Theme, confusion between poverty and spirituality. Since childhood, I heard a phrase repeated like a prayer. Humble is the one who has little. And for some reason I only later understood. It took root in me like a sacred commandment. I started to believe that the less I had, the purer I was. That the more I suffered, the closer I was to God. And without realizing it, I turned scarcity into a virtue, and wealth into a sin. I grew up seeing people with money being labeled as cold, distant, greedy, and even when they helped someone, the whispers would come, "It's just for show." Meanwhile, those who could barely pay their bills were praised as simple, genuine, good. And what no one noticed, not even me, was that this created a socially approved mental code of self-sabotage. The lie was disguised as a moral value, and the more I repeated it, the further I drifted from abundance without even knowing it. Because deep down, I thought being prosperous would distance me from my essence, as if money had the power to corrupt me, as if faith and wealth were opposites, when in reality they're sisters. True humility, I learned late, has nothing to do with your bank balance. It has to do with the state of your soul. It's about knowing you can have a lot without needing to belittle anyone. You can grow without forgetting where you came from. You can become wealthy without losing your humanity. But no one told me that. The mental programming was so subtle that I sabotaged myself without noticing. Whenever I earned a little more, something inside me tightened. It was guilt, a feeling that I was becoming less me. And so I made sure to spend it all, to return to normal, to stay acceptable in the eyes of those I feared disappointing. How many times have you done this? How many times have you sabotaged your own prosperity to maintain the narrative that you're humble, simple, spiritual? Carl Jung said that what you resist persists, and I resisted money, not out of fear of it, but out of fear of who I thought I'd become if I had it. Napoleon Hill taught us that the subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between good and bad. It just repeats what it's been conditioned to believe. And if you grew up hearing that money alienates, corrupts, destroys, your subconscious will protect you from it, even if consciously you want to prosper. This is spiritualized self-sabotage. The real problem was never money. It was what I believed it meant. I thought that by prospering, I'd lose my place at the table of simplicity. But today I understand. Those who truly love me don't measure my essence by what I have, but by the light I share. When I started changing this belief, everything began to transform, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. I allowed myself to be abundant, and more. I allowed myself to remain good, even while being rich. I allowed myself to pray with gratitude, not fear. I allowed myself to say, I am humble, but my mind is wealthy, because in the end, the greatest act of humility is not wasting the gift God gave you. And He didn't give you scarcity. He gave you power. The lie about humility. That's what impoverished you. But now that you see it, you can choose to rewrite it. The promise I made as a child, that keeps me from getting rich even today. Theme, unconscious loyalty to family and inherited patterns. Not every prison has bars. Some have memories, old silences, promises you made without realizing it. I remember mine. I was just a child when I saw my mother crying because she didn't have money to buy food. She tried to hide it, but I saw, I felt it. And there, with tearful eyes and a wounded boy's heart, I promised myself, one day, when I grow up, I'll never abandon my family. And I kept that promise. Too much. I grew up. I sought knowledge. I developed myself. I worked hard. I started to prosper. But every time I moved forward, something inside pulled me back. It wasn't fear. It wasn't doubt. It was loyalty. Carl Jung said that as long as the unconscious remains unconscious, it will direct your life. And that was it. I wasn't free. I was tied to a childish promise, made in pain and carried like an invisible anchor. My progress was limited by the fear of betraying my origins, as if getting rich meant abandoning those I loved most. That promise wasn't bad. It was beautiful. It was full of love, but it was also full of guilt, because when you grow up surrounded by scarcity, you start to believe that moving to a new level means leaving others behind, and no one wants to be the traitor of their own story. So every time a bigger opportunity arose, I limited myself. I didn't invest. I didn't dare. I didn't expand, because deep down there was a pact. I stay where you are so we can stay together. That's not nobility, that's self-sabotage in the name of love. Napoleon Hill spoke about the importance of cutting mental ties with everything that blocks our growth. But how do you cut ties when the bond is with those you love? The answer lies in awareness. In understanding that helping someone doesn't mean sinking with them, it means rising and extending a hand. Only after a lot of pain and reflection did I realize honoring my family wasn't about repeating their scarcity. It was about breaking the cycle. It was about going further. It was about showing it's possible. It was about carrying the name with dignity, not limitation. And above all, it was about trusting that my success doesn't distance me from anyone. It only expands my ability to care. That childhood promise, if not reframed, becomes adult sabotage. You sabotage yourself from within, thinking you're being loyal. But in reality, you're betraying yourself. And there's no greater disloyalty than that, living below your potential to avoid disturbing anyone. I rewrote my promise. Now it says, I will prosper so much that no one in my family will ever have to cry over lack again. This new promise doesn't hold me back. It moves me. It honors my inner child, but with adult wisdom. And you? What silent promises still bind you? What pacts did you make with pain, with guilt, with the past? Maybe your poverty isn't a lack of ability. Maybe it's an excess of loyalty to something that should have been healed by now. The silent habit that always pulls me down, even when everything's going right. Theme, cyclical self-sabotage pattern. There are defeats that hurt, but there are victories that scare. And that's what I discovered in that moment when everything finally seemed to be going right. Things were flowing. Money was coming in. People were recognizing me. Doors were opening. But inside me, there was unease. Something uncomfortable. A subtle, almost imperceptible discomfort, as if the success I'd begged for was crushing me from within. That's when I realized I was sabotaging the best moment of my life, with small actions, with impulsive decisions, with distractions, with excuses disguised as exhaustion, the same old pattern, the same cycle disguised as a crisis, only now, in a scene of prosperity. Carl Jung said, "We don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And there was my darkness, the fear of sustainable success, the unconscious idea that this isn't for me, that it'll go wrong any minute. Because I'd never learned to sustain. only to survive. You get so used to struggle that when peace arrives, it feels like a threat. And so you create chaos. You invent problems. You delay deliveries. You ignore opportunities. All to return to what's familiar. Effort without results. Because that's where your mind knows how to operate. That's where it was trained to live. This self-sabotage habit is sneaky. It hides in the details. In the times you say, just today I won't do it. In the moments you pretend you didn't see the chance. In the voice that says, this is too much for me. It doesn't shout, it lulls you. It convinces you that stagnating is prudent, that retreating is strategic. But in reality, it's fear. Fear of the next level. Napoleon Hill called this the emotional comfort zone. And the cruelest part is that it feels like safety, but it's a prison. Because you weren't made to stay where you are. Your mind evolves through movement, through risk, through overcoming. But the habit of self-sabotage holds you back, always. And the saddest part is that you don't even notice. You think you're just tired, that you need a break, that maybe this isn't the moment. But deep down, you're scared of getting it right. Because getting it right demands consistency. It demands inner structure. It demands becoming someone who can sustain the blessing. I had to confront myself, discipline myself, reprogram myself. Understand that success isn't a destination. It's a state that needs to be cultivated every day. And if I don't change my behavior, my mind will always pull me back to the starting point. So, if you find yourself stopping every time you start to win, know this. It's not the world knocking you down. It's the old you pulling you back. And that only changes when you decide to break through, when you recognize the pattern, when you replace the habit of self-sabotage with the commitment to sustain yourself. The voice in my head that calls me an imposter every time I try to move forward. Theme: inferiority complex and limited identity. I remember the exact feeling. It wasn't fear, it wasn't laziness, it was a voice, an inner voice that surfaced every time I took a bigger step, every time I dared to step into the spotlight, show my work, express my value. That voice said, "Who do you think you are?" It didn't shout, it mocked, and that silent mockery paralyzed me. The feeling was like I was trespassing on a territory that wasn't mine. As if at any moment someone would unmask me, as if I were playing a role, as if I'd fooled the world, and sooner or later they'd discover I was a fraud. That's the name, imposter syndrome. Carl Jung would say this voice comes from the shadow, the part of us that was rejected, diminished, silenced, the child who was criticized for trying to stand out, the teenager who was mocked for showing talent, the adult who was discredited by those who should have supported them. And the worst part, the voice became internalized. And now, you're the one sabotaging yourself. It's a cruel mechanism. You study, prepare, work hard. But as you approach the achievement, you doubt. Not the opportunity, but yourself. And success starts to feel like an accident, a fluke. You start to think it was luck, that you're not enough, that something's still missing. And so, you freeze. Napoleon Hill called this the self-imposed inferiority complex, a kind of emotional hypnosis that says others can, I can't, and the mind believes it and repeats it. And even with all the evidence to the contrary, you feel small, unworthy, an intruder. But what no one told you is that this voice is just an echo. It's not real. It's the emotional memory of moments when you weren't seen, validated, or loved as you needed. And now you repeat the abuse yourself. You sabotage yourself. You become your own emotional aggressor. I had to silence that voice with presence, with awareness. Every time it said, "You're not capable," I replied, "Yes, I am." And here's the proof. With actions, with decisions, with movement. Because you don't overcome imposter syndrome with self-esteem, you overcome it with action. And more, I understood that I'm not an imposter for having doubts. I'm human. Everyone has fears. Everyone hesitates. The difference is that some hear the voice and retreat. Others hear it and move forward anyway. Courage isn't the absence of insecurity. Courage is crossing through it. If you feel like you don't deserve what you're building, remember, that voice isn't yours. It's inherited, and you don't have to obey it anymore. Today, you can speak louder than it. You can replace it. You can create a new narrative, one of someone who overcame themselves. The day I asked for less, and the universe gave me exactly that theme: scarcity mindset and low self-esteem. Have you ever asked for less than you wanted just to avoid disappointment? Have you ever lowered your expectations out of fear of frustration? I have. And I remember exactly the day it happened. I was about to negotiate an opportunity that could change my life. But when it came time to talk about value, about what I deserved, about what I truly wanted, I scaled it all down. I asked for less. I shrank. I thought that would make it easier for them to say yes, and the universe, like a silent mirror, gave me exactly that. Less. At the time, I didn't notice. Only later, when I saw that opportunity handed to someone less prepared but far more confident, did it hit me. The world doesn't give you what you dream of. It gives you what you believe you deserve. And that day, my belief condemned me to a small outcome because my vibration was shaped by scarcity. A poor mind isn't just about your bank account. It's in the way you present yourself to the world. It's in the tone of voice you use to talk about yourself. It's in the terms you accept, in the crumbs you celebrate, in the lack you disguise as humility. This is hard to hear, but liberating to understand. You're living what you tolerate. Carl Jung said that what lies in our unconscious manifests as fate. And my fate was tied to the fear of seeming ambitious, fear of seeming arrogant, fear of disturbing by asking for more. But today I see it wasn't ambition, it was dignity, and staying silent was a way of betraying myself. Napoleon Hill wrote, "The universe doesn't reward what you want, it rewards what you demand of yourself." And demanding isn't arrogance, it's clarity, it's firm energy, it's a vibration aligned with the value you carry. That day, I wasn't vibrating greatness, I was vibrating fear. And the universe responded exactly with what I sent out. Most people sabotage themselves by asking for little from life. They ask for little love, little recognition, little money, not because they want little, but because they don't think they're capable of sustaining the much. The fear of loss stops them from even trying to gain. It's the "at least" disguised as "I'm content," but deep down, it's self-abandonment. When you ask for less, you send the universe this message: I don't trust myself. I don't trust that I can have. I don't trust that I deserve. And the universe doesn't argue, it simply confirms, "Amen, let it be done according to your faith." I had to change my inner dialogue. I started asking myself, what if I asked for what I really want? Not what's convenient, not what's likely, but what my soul craves, what my spirit dreams of in silence. And at first it was uncomfortable, but over time it became a habit. And that habit became expansion. Today, I understand. Asking for a lot isn't arrogance. It's a courageous prayer. It's trusting there's room for you at the top. It's declaring to the universe that you didn't come here to live halfway. You came to be whole. And being whole requires stopping asking for little. So the next time you're negotiating, planning, dreaming, ask yourself with courage, am I asking with faith or with fear? Because the way you ask determines what you receive, and the way you vibrate defines the size of your reality. The belief I defended that condemned me to failure, theme limiting philosophy embedded in common discourse. Some ideas don't originate in you, they're planted, repeated by parents, teachers, religious leaders, co-workers, And over time, you stop questioning them. They become absolute truths, and worse, you start defending them as if they were yours. That's exactly what happened to me with one phrase in particular. Money doesn't bring happiness. I said it with conviction, and I was proud of it. I repeated it in conversations, posted it on social media, felt wise for saying something so mature. But I didn't realize what was behind that belief. It wasn't wisdom. It was fear. It was guilt. It was the programming of a mind trained for scarcity, dressed up as philosophy. That seemingly harmless phrase kept me trapped, because by believing money wasn't important, I justified my poverty as a sign of purity. And unconsciously, I pushed away opportunities, limited earnings, and rejected prosperity as if it were a threat to my character. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious is shaped by symbols and archetypes. And for my mind, the symbol of the rich was someone greedy, cold, disconnected from God. The poor, on the other hand, was pure, close to spirituality, deserving of compassion. And this created an inner dilemma. Either I was good, or I was rich. Never both. Napoleon Hill warned about the social lies accepted as spiritual truths, and this was one of them, because deep down, what stopped me from prospering wasn't a lack of talent or effort. It was this hidden belief, fervently defended, that said wanting more was a sign of vanity, and so every time I approached a breakthrough, something inside made me pull back. An invisible break, a silent code, because if I prospered, I'd be betraying myself. I'd be going against what I'd defended for years. And the ego doesn't like to be proven wrong. It prefers to keep you trapped rather than let you grow in contradiction. The cruelest thing about limiting beliefs is that you defend them. You don't question them. You protect them. You become the advocate of your own prison. And meanwhile, your destiny keeps circling, waiting for you to break the spell of what you've always believed. The liberation began when, for the first time, I asked, what if this idea is wrong? What if money isn't the villain? What if it's in fact an amplifier of what's already in me? What if I can be rich and still be generous, spiritual, upright? The truth is, money doesn't bring happiness, but neither does the lack of it. Money is a means, a channel, an extension of your mind. And if your mind is clean, your money will be clean. If your soul is at peace, your prosperity will be peaceful. The belief I defended kept me in scarcity, but the day I questioned it, everything started to change. Because no transformation starts from the outside. It starts at the exact moment you stop repeating and start thinking. Rewriting, liberating. So I ask you, what lie do you still defend with pride? And what has it been silently costing you? The silence I kept, out of fear of disturbing with my shine. Theme: fear of judgment, self-diminishment, and social sabotage. Have you ever wanted to speak, but stayed silent, wanted to show your talent, but held back? Had a brilliant idea, but gave up halfway because you imagined what others would think? I have, many times. And that silence, which seemed like prudence, was actually fear. Fear of disturbing, fear of shining too brightly. I grew up hearing that those who stand out too much get knocked down, that the nail that sticks out is the first to get hammered. So I learned to be discreet, to not show too much of what I knew. To not stand out, because deep down my mind believed that shining was a risk, a danger, an invitation to attack. Carl Jung spoke about the fear of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Because when you fully embrace yourself, you provoke your environment. You become a mirror of what others fear becoming, and that disturbs. That's why many prefer to stay invisible. It's safer. But the problem is that by hiding your shine, you also hide your mission. You silence yourself in the face of your own light, and over time, that starts to hurt. You feel suffocated, empty, disconnected from yourself, because you're alive, but not present. You're here, but not whole. I remember being invited to speak at an important event. I knew I had something valuable to say, but the night before, I considered backing out. I thought, what if they think I'm arrogant? What if they say I'm full of myself? That voice was familiar. It was the same one that had silenced me forever, and that time I heard it. But I chose not to obey. Napoleon Hill said, "The world makes room for the man who knows where he's going." And I understood that if I didn't take up my space, someone less prepared but bolder would, not because they were better, but because they weren't afraid to show up. Because those who aren't afraid to shine guide those who live in the dark. The self-sabotage here is subtle. You say you're waiting for the right moment, that you need more preparation, that it's not yet time. But in reality, you're afraid to stand out. Because you know that standing out means losing the comfort of mediocre acceptance. It'll generate criticism, envy, noise, but it'll also inspire, liberate, expand. Shining does disturb, yes, but never disturbing is a sign you're dimmed. And you didn't come here for that. You didn't come to fit in. You came to illuminate, even if it blinds some, even if it irritates others, because your light isn't about them. It's about you fulfilling what you were born to do. Today, when I feel that old urge to hide, I remember it's not ego to want to be seen when what you carry can transform lives. The ego is hiding out of fear of judgment. The soul doesn't shout, but it doesn't stay silent either. It acts, it serves, it shines. If you're staying silent to avoid disturbing, understand, the price of silence may be the loss of your purpose, and that's too high a price to pay with the currency of others' approval. The future project that kept me stuck in the same place. Theme: chronic procrastination, disguised as planning. For years I felt productive. I had notebooks full of goals, mind maps, ideas, projects, each one more inspiring than the last. I'd talk with sparkling eyes about what I was going to do. I planned every step, organized the path. But as ironic as it sounds, the more I planned, the less I progressed. It was as if the future was a crutch, a shelter, a noble alibi. Because I wasn't stagnant, I was preparing. But the raw, painful truth is that I was paralyzed, hiding behind the most sophisticated excuse of the sabotaging mind: one day I will. Carl Jung said that what you avoid ends up dominating you. And I was avoiding the now, avoiding the risk, the exposure, the delivery, because the future is a safe place for those afraid to act. It allows you to dream without committing. And that was the poison. It gave me the illusion of progress, but kept me in the same spot. Napoleon Hill warned about emotional procrastination, that which doesn't look like laziness but perfectionism. You don't start because you want to do it right, and that right never comes. So you wait, and while you wait, life passes, time passes, and the project becomes another draft tucked away. I had to face myself and accept. It's not a lack of time. It's an excess of fear. Fear of not being good enough, fear of failing, fear of being judged. And so I hid my cowardice in planning, turned action into abstraction, movement into intention. And the worst part, the world applauded. People said I was organized, visionary, detail-oriented. But deep down, I was inert, because only what you do changes your life, not what you think about doing. The universe doesn't reward good ideas. It responds to courageous decisions. So I decided to flip the equation. I traded perfection for presence, took the plans out of the drawer, executed with what I had, without guarantees, without the ideal scenario, without applause, but with truth. And to my surprise, the world responded. Because the world doesn't wait for your best, it waits for your now. You're not stuck due to a lack of strategy. You're stuck by the illusion that it's not yet time. And that's a trap of the fearful mind. Because as Seneca said, while we wait to live, life passes. And the future isn't where things happen. It's the hiding place where things die. Today I understand. The future project that kept me excited also kept me stuck. It fed my hope while destroying my action. But liberation began when I swapped one day for today, and when it works out for I'll make it work. If you're waiting for the ideal scenario to start, know this: the ideal doesn't exist. There's only now, and now is begging you to live it. The routine that seemed normal, but was silently making me sick. Theme: cycle of destructive habits maintained for convenient self-sabotage sometimes, isn't in the big falls. It's in the subtle repetitions, in those small habits that seem harmless but numb you little by little. For a long time I believed my routine was functional. I woke up, worked, handled what needed to be done, everything in order, until I started to get sick inside. It wasn't physical pain, it was a silent exhaustion, an apathy that invaded my days, even when everything seemed to be going fine. A feeling of being trapped in a predictable, automatic, sterile cycle. And the scariest part, I called this adult life. I called this responsibility. Carl Jung said that boredom is the shadow of the repressed self. And I understood. That daily pattern, repeated without awareness, was a form of self-abandonment. I stopped listening to my intuition. Stopped seeking what inspired me. Stopped taking intentional pauses. Stopped nourishing myself internally. I was killing myself slowly in the name of normalcy. Routine, when unquestioned, becomes a prison. You wake up in a hurry, rush without direction, complete tasks without presence, and go to bed feeling like you lived without really being there. That's the trap. The cycle that steals your soul but gives you a false sense of security. Napoleon Hill wrote that habit is the strongest of invisible masters. And he was right. Because you start doing it out of necessity, but continue out of inertia, you adapt to the shallow, get used to the lukewarm, settle for the lack of shine, and you start calling that balance. But the truth is, this silent routine distances you from yourself. It distances you from your gifts, your creativity, your purpose. It suppresses the flame within you until only ashes remain. And the worst part? No one warns you, because everyone's living the same way. I had to break the pattern with awareness. I started observing my days, noting what drained me, what nourished me, what made my body shrink, and what expanded my soul. And little by little, I cleaned it up. I swapped the automatic for the intentional, the have to for the choose to. Today, my routine is still simple, but it's mine. I wake up with purpose, take pauses with presence, have rituals that reconnect me. I no longer live on autopilot. Because I learned, routine isn't about repeating, it's about sustaining what keeps you alive. If you feel like your days are killing you bit by bit, question them. Because normal, sometimes, is just the fancy name for what's silently destroying you. And you didn't come to the world to survive the week. You came to expand, to overflow, to live with soul in every act. The invisible mentor controlling my life, and I didn't even know theme. Beliefs implanted by authority figures, parents, religion, society. Not every mentor comes in the form of a master. Sometimes they settle in as an inner voice, a voice that guides you, but also limits you, that directs you, but also sabotages you. That's how I discovered that behind many of my decisions was someone who wasn't me, but spoke for me. That voice said, "This isn't for you." It said, "Don't dream too big." It said, "Life is hard, accept it," and I obeyed. Not for lack of will, but out of respect, because those phrases carried affection, history, emotional authority. They came from childhood, from family, from religion, from school. They were teachings, or rather conditionings. Carl Jung said that we don't just live our own lives, we also carry the unlived lives of our parents. And that hit hard, because much of what I thought was my way was actually inheritance. I carried my father's fear, my mother's guilt, my grandparents' scarcity, and I called it personality. This is where the invisible mentor comes in, the one you didn't choose but never challenged, the one who said life was tough and you believed, who said the rich are bad and you absorbed it, who taught that ambition is a sin and you internalized it. This mentor doesn't give orders, it gives you identity. And so, without realizing it, you shape your entire life around beliefs that aren't yours. You choose careers, relationships, lifestyles, all to obey an invisible script, a survival manual passed down as wisdom, but that in reality keeps you captive. Napoleon Hill taught that the first step to freedom is self-analysis, and that requires courage. Courage to ask, is this idea mine or was it placed in me? Courage to disobey with awareness, to contradict with respect, to break free without guilt. I had to revisit my references, question them with care, free myself without rebellion, look into the eyes of the past and say, I honor you, but I'll follow a different path. Because evolving isn't abandoning those who came before. It's continuing what they couldn't finish. Today, I still hear that voice sometimes, but now I talk to it. I thank it for what it tried to do. I acknowledge its intention, but I don't obey it anymore. Because now my mentor is me, my compass is internal, my authority is consciousness. If you feel like you're living a life that doesn't represent you, stop and ask, who's in charge? Who's guiding your choices? Who's the invisible mentor living in your mind? And maybe it's time to let them go. The false freedom of saying, I don't care about money. Theme, unconscious defense against frustration and low financial vibration. For a long time, I repeated with pride, money isn't important to me, and I applauded myself for it. I thought it was a sign of evolution, of detachment, of higher consciousness, but deep down I knew it was a lie. It was just an emotional armor, a sophisticated excuse for the fear of never being able to prosper. Saying you don't care about money when, in reality, you don't know how to attract it is a way to protect yourself. You preempt frustration, you strip power from what you don't control, and you call it a choice. But in reality, it's a silent surrender, a giving up disguised as spirituality. Carl Jung said that what you deny dominates you, and I denied money. I said it was secondary, that it didn't define anything, that it didn't matter. But at the same time, I suffered for not having it. I felt anger seeing others succeed. I compared myself in silence, and that created an inner conflict that sickened my soul. I didn't want to admit I cared, because admitting it meant facing the void. It meant accepting that I felt powerless, that there was a gap between what I wanted and what I lived. So it was easier to pretend I didn't care. It was more comfortable to say, this isn't for me. Napoleon Hill taught that money is a form of energy, and that only those who vibrate in harmony with it attract it. And how can you vibrate in harmony with something you despise? How can you attract what you reject? How can you manifest what you pretend you don't want? The truth is that this indifference to money is often an emotional shield, a defense mechanism created by those wounded by scarcity. It's like saying, if I don't expect anything, I won't be disappointed. But that's not freedom. That's an emotional prison disguised as clarity. I had to forgive myself for denying so much, for hiding behind a beautiful but empty narrative, for sabotaging my prosperity in the name of wounded pride. And I had to learn to say with humility and truth, yes, I care about money, because it's an extension of the life I want to build. And more, I had to understand that loving money isn't idolatry when it serves a purpose, when it's not the center but the bridge, when it's not the end but the means, when it doesn't define your value but amplifies your mission. Today, I care about money, yes, because I know what I can do with it. I know how many lives I can touch. I know how much peace I can create. And I know my value isn't reduced to what I have, but what I have can reflect the value I recognize in myself. If you still say you don't care about money, maybe you're just protecting yourself. But too much protection becomes a wall, and too many walls keep abundance out. Allow yourself to desire, allow yourself to prosper, because only those who free themselves from the lie of indifference can truly live the truth of abundance. Conclusion. You made it this far, and if you did, it's because some part of you already knew that it wasn't the world holding you back. It wasn't chance, it wasn't others, it was you against you sabotaging yourself in the silence of daily choices, in the thoughts no one sees, in the excuses you repeat without noticing. Self-sabotage doesn't shout, it whispers. It convinces you with logic, distracts you with routine, deceives you with the comfort of what's never taken you anywhere. But now, something has shifted. The truth has been spoken, the mirror has been shown, and even if it hurts, it liberates, because there's no healing without revelation, and there's no growth without confrontation. What you do from now on is what determines whether this awareness will turn into transformation or just another video saved in the drawer of procrastination. You can watch and forget, or you can watch and decide. Decide to reprogram your mind, reclaim your value, rebuild your story with conscious choices, because from today you know where the saboteur lives, and you know it's not outside, it's in the mirror. If this message touched you, subscribe now, not for numbers, but for awareness, because here every video is a reminder of who you can be when you stop sabotaging yourself. And if you can, leave a comment. Say which truth confronted you the most. Your answer might be someone else's awakening.